No, we're going to repeat every mistake from Bush and Iraq, only this time with Trump and Iran. Only this time starting with blowing up nuclear facilities. Only this time starting with Trump making up stories about the other country wanting to negotiate. Only this time starting while the Senate has gone home until next week, so no briefings until next week. We're going to do this again because Trump got FOMO. FOMOOB, actually. Fear of missing out on bombing. When I said that in Monday's podcast, I was serious. FOMO. FOMO is what animates Trump, the dreadful existential fear he has that something, somewhere in the world, is not being credited to him. But I didn't think it was going to be decisive. This is where the narrator says, it was decisive. We are gearing up for a strike, I think, on the Fordo facility. What I can see is the military maneuvers are getting in place. That was Brett McGurk yesterday. Brett McGurk was Obama's point man against ISIS. And then he was Trump's point man against ISIS. So I don't think he's grinding an axe here. Oh, and mix in some of this phony Mike Huckabee religious ecstasy. We have to save Israel because we have to make sure the Jews get raptured, fundamentalist, anti-Semitic bullshit. And we're here again. New York Times, quote, when he woke on Friday morning, his favorite TV channel, Fox News, was broadcasting wall-to-wall imagery of what it was portraying as Israel's military genius, and Mr. Trump could not resist claiming some credit for himself. FOMO. That's when the I was more involved than I said psychosis from Trump started to seep in to his out loud voice. By Sunday, it was beginning to flower. We'd never attack Iran, but when we do, quote, the U.S. had nothing to do with the attack on Iran tonight. If we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict. That's all the possibilities in one sentence. We could blow you up. You could blow us up. Oh, but we could negotiate our way out of this. And by the day before yesterday, we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old USA. We blowed him up good. We blowed him up real good. This is Big Jim McTrump and Billy Saul Huckabee saying, may the good Lord take a liking to you and blow you up real soon. Billy Saul Huckabee. When Bush did this with Iraq, and yeah, this is where I came in. I seem to recall saying if we didn't stop Bush about Iraq, the next Republican president would do this in Iran. And sure enough, here we are. When Bush did this with Iraq, he went through this long, sometimes subtle, intricate, labyrinthine, sometimes deeply sourced series of lies and manufactured evidence and blackmail and the exploitation of 9/11 and the dragging in of Saddam Hussein. He went to all that trouble when he could have just done a Trump and just blowed it up real good. After first publishing the religious delusions of a fundamentalist confidence trickster and TV pitchman for red grape circulation superfood named Mike Huckabee. Bush could have just said it was to defend Israel. Who knew? Even though the reason the Huckabees and the others who in previous generations would have been back home at the Church of God handling snakes, the technical term for which we students of religion use is self-correcting problem for the handling of snakes. The entirety of the mainstream defense of Israel is not predicated on preserving Israel, but about fulfilling this madness that all the world's Jews will be gathered in Israel and then converted, and then we will have the rapture, and all the good souls will go to heaven, and everybody else will stay here and enjoy hell on earth, which is pretty much where we are right now anyway. Please note that if you read all of the fundamentalist stuff about the conversion of the Jews, if you read it, it's very carefully written. And all it really says is that there will only be Jews in Israel. And those that won't go there and convert will perish or vanish in the rapture. Well, there's lots of ways you can achieve that, and most of them involve murder. This means that Mike Huckabee is involved in a religious movement that literally wants to save Israel from Iran or anybody else because the only people allowed to destroy Israel are American evangelicals. Trump not only listens to this drivel and thinks, there's my excuse, I can go drop some bombs and get some credit for something. He then ratchets it up and publishes it so he reinforces the idea that this is something religious. Ambassador Huckabee's text to President Trump. I'd forgotten he was the ambassador. At least he's out of the country. Mr. President, God spared you in Butler, PA, to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. What was God thinking about that poor guy got shot in the head who was sitting there just listening to this shit? God said, you are spared. That guy over there, I don't like that guy. Some God you got here. The decisions on your shoulders I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking to you, sir. Oh boy, is that true. Trump has many voices in his head. You're right about that, Huck. But there is only one voice that matters, his voice. And Trump is reading this going, Hannity? I am your appointed servant in this land and am available for you. But I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven, and that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. And Trump is thinking, Janine Pirro, you sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. Yeah. Bombs start dropping. Mike's going to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment. This moment sought you. Who in the hell thinks that the American flag is going to come down in Israel? It is my honor to serve you. Just remember to serve man. Mike Huckabee. They printed this out. First, they printed out the actual text, or what is supposedly the text. Then they made a pretty-looking picture of Huckabee and Trump not quite looking at each other with the words, America's future, right over each of their heads. America's future, Mike Huckabee and Donald Trump. Or our past. And by the way, if you read that again and change a couple of words in this thing from Huckabee, this text, this is also the script for Mike Huckabee's TV commercial for another snake oil called Relaxium. God put Relaxium on this earth to relax you. Two other points about the religious ecstasy bullshit. The next level delusion after this, and millions in this country believe this as well, is that if Israel is at war, this means Jesus will be coming back, like late Sunday. Maybe in time for brunch. So wear your crosses, because as the late, great comic genius Bill Hicks noted, sure, that's the first thing Jesus wants to see when he comes back, you wearing a cross. One thing that is never explained is like, oh, if Israel is at war, that means Jesus is coming back. What about the last 16 wars? He didn't come back for any of those. Does he not get the news? Does he not get Fox News wherever he is? We know Jesse Waters thinks he speaks with divine influence. Now back on this earth. There are some practical consequences here. Politico's foreign affairs correspondent mentions the one thing that Trump hasn't counted on, the Iranian response. Quote, a former Western intelligence official told me the spy community suspects the Islamist regime in Tehran has sleeper cells in various countries to carry out attacks if it feels an existential threat. The regime could also round up Americans in Iran and effectively hold them hostage, as it has done in the past. So, we're not only going to reenact Iraq, and remember how well and how quickly that went. We go in and blow it up, and 42 days later, Bush declares mission accomplished, and I'm co-anchoring with Chris Matthews, and I say to him, wait, if it's mission accomplished, why is there still fighting there, and why is the cross-eyed president wearing a flight suit if he doesn't want us to remember the questions about his Air National Guard service? Shut up, Matthews explained tenderly. We're not only going to reenact Iraq, only with a different final letter. We are going to reenact something like the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 and 1980, which was also exploited by a Republican president. Rule 1 of war. No wars are ever quick, and all wars are sold as being quick. The other consequences will be largely political and domestic. Tucker Carlson attacked Trump. Ted Cruz attacked Carlson. Steve Bannon attacked Fox News as not being real MAGA. Josh Hawley said, I don't want us fighting a war. I don't want another Mideast war. It's so obviously a bad idea that even Tulsi Gabbard knows it's a bad idea. And she told Trump this in March and put out that psycho video last month about nuclear war and leaked that if Trump gets us involved, she'll have to quit. And when they asked Trump about her testimony that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon, he said, I don't care what she said, and the odds are 6-5. He doesn't really know who she is. Or at least he doesn't really know who she is anymore. So whatever the end game here is, it will damage Trump and MAGA and the entire voting bloc in this country that believes in brownies and elves and guys who come back from the dead, but not until you wait 2,025 years for them. And whatever the Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns are will then alter the entire political landscape a second time. And oh, yeah, somebody will eventually notice that this will be 3 consecutive Republican presidents who've attacked Iraq or Iran, and the one before them, Reagan, wanted to attack Iran. The bottom line is, of course, as simple now as it was in 2002 and 2003. The purpose of war with Iran is the same as was the purpose of war with Iraq. It's to have a war. Because if you don't have a war, you can't use all those expensive bombs and tanks and have to replace them. And especially those bombers. And I mean, honestly, when was the last time we sent a couple of $2 billion B-2 stealth bombers anywhere and had one of them shot down or broken or the door fell off? And oops, we have to buy a new one. So the Department of Defense needs another $2 billion. The point of a Republican war, neocons, MAGA, Bush, Trump, it doesn't matter. The point of a Republican war is to transfer taxpayer money to the military-industrial complex. Ike was right. End of story. The only way Jesus Christ comes into this is in our reaction to all this. Jesus Christ! Again? We blowed him up good. We blowed him up real good. If you don't know, we blowed him up real good, by the way. That is from SCTV, the late, great John Candy and the late, great Joe O'Flaherty and the Farm movie review in which these two guys in overalls talk about tremendous Fassbinder films and eventually get around to the fact that the only films they like are the ones in which people get blown up. And that's the end. We blowed him up real good. Billy Sol Hurock and Big Jim McBob. It's worth looking for it. Elsewhere, okay, so that's now 4 serving elected Democratic government officials harassed, beaten, arrested, and lied about by Kristi Noem's ICE Gestapo. She had to go to the hospital the other day for an allergic reaction. What? An allergic reaction to reality? The latest arrest, the arrest and then unarrest of the New York City comptroller Brad Lander, seems to have been, and you haven't heard this probably, a setup. Firstly, this was not some sort of stunt for Brad Lander's campaign for mayor. He has been going to immigration court for weeks, trying to literally throw his body between ICE and its cruelest of its many cruel tortures, getting immigration cases dismissed against defendants, thus denying them protection against immediate seizure and rendition without trial. This was the 3rd or 4th time he'd done it. This was just the first time somebody stopped him. The best local news site here, The City, reports the details that give away the fact that this was a setup. Quote, in the chaotic scene at around noon, Lander asked the agents repeatedly to show a judicial warrant. You do not have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens, Lander repeated as the officers tightened handcuffs to his wrists. The federal agents escorted him into an elevator with one member of his NYPD security detail alongside him. Note in this, ICE arrested a New York City police officer. A reporter from The City had overheard one agent say to another minutes before Lander's arrest, "Do you want to arrest the comptroller?" It was a setup. They planned this. And then they stone cold lied about Brad Lander, even though there was video. Homeland Security protecting America via Kristi Noem's tweets. New York City Comptroller Brad Lander was arrested for assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer. Our heroic ICE law enforcement officers face a 413% increase in assaults against them. 413%? That's all we have? It is wrong that politicians seeking higher office undermine law enforcement safety to get a viral moment. No one is above the law except Kristi Noem and ICE and Trump, and we're going to change that. If you lay a hand on a law enforcement officer, you will face consequences. If we lay a hand on you illegally, we will not face consequences. I added that last part. Signed, Homeland Security spokesperson Billy Sol-Hurok. Cool. The video shows the exact opposite of what you wrote here, but you're ICE. You're supposed to lie. You're the scum of the earth. It's the old Monty Python joke come to life. We charged him with illegal possession of whatever we happened to have at the police station, which in this case was a desk. The good news here is that for the first time, I can speak with pride about the current governor of this state. It appears that the rage in Gavin Newsom in California, and get back in the rage business, Governor, the glow is beginning to fade a little bit around the edges. But that glow remains inspirational to other governors in the normally meh blue states. And speaking of blue, Governor Kathy Hochul goes blue.
Do you want to know what I really think?
Please.
It's bullshit. How dare they take an elected official who's been going down there for weeks to escort people who are afraid to walk into a courthouse in the United States of America because despite them having legal status and following the rules and making their appointments, that they don't know what's going to happen to them. So Brad Lander has stepped up to be a guiding help for them. And this is what happens to him? What the hell is happening to this country?
That's right, Governor. Exactly. The bon mot, the mot juste, it's bullshit. And we need not just that sentiment, but that language from Democrats. Chuck Schumer, get up there and say it's bullshit. Once again, we are not going to negotiate our way out of this. Somebody asked me the other day, when are the Republicans finally going to stop Trump? They're not. They're in power. They no longer care how they got there. They're no longer going to give it up voluntarily. We are not going to have beautifully crafted Maddow senior's thesis arguments lead us out of this. We are going to have to kick them in the balls our way out of this. because they have also now reversed course and reprioritized cruelty over food. Trump re-tacos on deportations. He's nacho moderate anymore. I'll quote the Washington Post. The Department of Homeland Security told staff that it was reversing guidance issued last week, that agents were not to conduct immigration raids at farms, hotels, and restaurants. A decision that stood at odds with Trump's calls for mass deportations of anyone without legal status. Officials from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, including its Homeland Security Investigations Division, just call them the Gestapo, told agency leaders in a call that agents must continue conducting immigration raids at agricultural businesses, hotels, and restaurants, according to two people familiar with the call. Once again, a reminder from Georgia in 2011, they only had 60% of the farm workers they needed because of a crackdown on migrant farm workers, and at least $75 million worth of food rotted in the fields just in Georgia. If they do this well enough, if they pursue this sufficiently, there will be food shortages. Not, oh, I couldn't get my favorite brand of crudité. Not that, no, just like no food. Also, oops, ICE is already out of money. Don't worry, we'll just cut Social Security or prosecuting criminals. Or maybe we'll fire some more air traffic controllers. This is from Axios. Trump's immigration crackdown is burning through cash so quickly, the agency charged with arresting, detaining, and removing unauthorized immigrants could run out of money next month. Woohoo! Immigration and Customs Enforcement, parentheses, Gestapo, is already $1 billion over budget by one estimate, with more than 3 months left in the fiscal year. Its detention facilities, about 41,000 beds, are far past capacity as DHS continues to seek more detention space in the U.S. and abroad. Honest to God, you went to all this trouble to create this fictional disaster and invasion bullshit, and you did not build the facilities beforehand to make your money off of it? What kind of corrupt businessmen are you, ICE, and the private jail business? What kind of corrupt idiot are you, Gnome? Oh, no, I've had an allergic reaction to the law. I saw the Constitution, and I went lightheaded. Save the liver. I remember when I was a little girl. That's also worth looking up if you've never seen it. That's Dan Aykroyd as the magic chef cutting her wrists accidentally. Julia Child. And beginning to lose consciousness. Find that. And Big Jim McBob. If Trump's big bill, Axios continued, isn't passed soon, he could use his authority to declare a national emergency. How many effing national emergencies does this guy have up his ass? To redirect money to ICE from elsewhere in the government. Why don't you take it from the money wasted on big flagpoles and paving over the beautiful lawns of the White House? Who is the controller? Who is the handler for Donald Trump this time? It's Stephen Miller. A couple other things. The Senate has to censure Mike Lee. Mike Lee, who once was an actual kind of nerdy, wonk policy guy, is now just an out-of-control internet addict and showing all of the signs of deep, deep emotional damage because of it. He has now deleted his stochastic threat against Governor Walz, misspelling his name, Nightmare on Waltz Street. He put a T in it, which showed the Minnesota MAGA murderer next to a picture of the governor of Minnesota. That's a stochastic terrorist threat. In a real country, Mike Lee would have been arrested. The far right has dropped this story like not just a hot brick, but a ton of hot bricks. Turns out the guy is indeed ultra MAGA. From NPR, authorities in Minnesota say the man arrested in the Saturday attack that killed one state lawmaker and left another wounded had a hit list of 45 elected officials, all Democrats. But sure, he was an appointee to some 932nd most important commission in Minnesota by Governor Walz, who is a bipartisan guy in a bipartisan state, which means he couldn't possibly be MAGA. because he worked for Walls just because he wanted to kill Democrats. Blowed him up real good. Jesus is coming back for brunch. Here are the problems. Mike Lee deleted these things, won't acknowledge that he ever sent them, will not apologize. Trump would not call the governor saying he doesn't like the governor. The jokes that Mike Lee made were more befitting a mental patient than a senator, even a Republican senator. And what this underscores here is the fascists have now dropped even the lame pretense of thoughts and prayers. As always, the next question becomes, is any of this making any impact, or are we stuck permanently between the immovable object and the irresistible farce? Well, looky here. Strength in numbers is in. Democrats have an 8-point edge for the generic House ballot for the 2026 midterms. 45% of adults say they would back the Democratic candidate in their local congressional district, 37% for the Republican. Americans also say they are worried about corruption in the White House. 62% say Trump's promotion of his crypto represents a conflict of interest. 29% of adults say it's appropriate for the president to accept a luxury jet from Qatar as a gift. 54% say it's inappropriate. So the Trump administration is not getting away with this in the zeitgeist. That's the Trump administration and Shopping Channel. Because don't forget those new Trump American smartphones introduced after he hit Apple with 50% tariffs on iPhones. He put out his own iPhone. Trump phones. Trump phones. Hello, can you hear me now? Hello? There's no speaker. There's no, what? There's no, it doesn't dial? What? When Trump, by the way, says made in America, it turns out he actually means made in China. Also of interest here, if an American news organization put out a photo of what appeared to be Trump wearing a dunce cap, first off, it would be the most journalism in American news this year. But second, Trump and the MAGA martyrdom machine would come down on that news organization so hard that Bob Iger would send Trump $25 million even before Trump sued him. So, why did the government of the United States put out a photo of what appears to be Trump wearing a dunce cap? That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this edition of Countdown. Last week would have been my mother's 96th birthday. She didn't quite make it to her 80th birthday. When she was alive, Mom used to lament that to the degree she was known as my dad's wife, or as my mother, or as my sister's mother. And then came that day in the year 2000 when all that changed. We have just passed the quarter-century anniversary of that day, June 17th, 2000. My mother is in her usual seat in the ninth row behind the dugout at Yankee Stadium. I am in my usual seat in the baseball studio at the Fox Television Network on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles, doing the pregame show for Major League Baseball and all the game highlights during the broadcasts. It is not an unusual Saturday for either my mother or myself, and then enter Chuck Knobloch, second baseman of the New York Yankees. But not for much longer. And thereupon, my mother ascends to baseball immortality. Next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. The Bronze, worse. CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, those other useless places collectively known as cable news. Philip Bump of the Washington Post, the last living cell in a dying body there, the great graphics visualizer of the rotting hulk of the Post, put this out in really great color bar graphs. What happened 2 Saturdays ago? Trump had a pathetic toy tank parade in which it, in retrospect, clearly looks like the soldiers deliberately mailed it in to make him look bad. Meanwhile, 5 million or more protesters attended the No Kings marches and rallies, and, a couple hundred people protested in Los Angeles. Maybe 1,000? There were anti-ICE protests in many cities, maybe a couple thousand all told. So what was coverage of all these events like on the cable networks? Well, sir, it's not just that the cable networks got the proportions all wrong, it's that the least well-proportioned, the least fair coverage was by CNN and MSNBC. By contrast, Fox was only terrible. The mentions per the bump data, CNN mentioned No Kings between June 8th and June 14th 73 times. That's a 7-day span. 73 mentions of the No Kings protests. Other protests mentioned 639 times. So like 9 times as many on CNN. MSNBC, they did much better. Instead of 73 mentions of No Kings, they mentioned it 77 times. Mentions of other protests, 625 times. So the two supposed real news cable networks did a crap job, and almost identically. They're now being programmed almost identically in terms of what they mention in terms of the news. There is a decreasing difference between the crap that drove away CNN's audience and the crap that is now driving away MSNBC's audience. Fox News mentioned No Kings, probably not favorably, 60 times, and mentioned all the other protests, including the LA protests, only 301 times. So in other words, the coverage of the protests, the anti-ICE protests and everything else, only got half the bad press on Fox that it did on CNN or MSNBC. MSNBC and CNN could not resist the pictures of smoke from LA, even if it was smoke from a 2-square-block area. Bump's graphs show in that same span 209 mentions of clashes, riots, rioting, vandalism, looting on MSNBC, 291 mentions of clashes, riots, rioting, vandalism, looting on CNN. This is even though, as the Post's own polling indicated, American opinion about the LA protests was split down the middle. 37% said it was mostly violent, 35% said it was mostly peaceful. Independents went 35-33 peaceful. So we don't have any cable news left in this country. Just turn your sets off there, as a New York sportscaster used to say. Runner-up, Katie Miller. Ever wonder what kind of messed up person would marry Stephen Miller? I'll just read this verbatim from the New York Times Backgrounder. Wasn't there a movie called The Millers, where they were like actually giant cockroaches from another planet who just pretended to be humans? Elon Musk stood before a giant American flag at a Wisconsin political rally in March and rolled out an eye-popping allegation of rampant fraud at the Social Security Administration. As an aside, remember Elon Musk? Scammers, he said, were making 40% of all calls to the agency's customer service line. Social Security employees knew the billionaire's claim had no basis in fact. After journalists followed up, staff members began drafting a response correcting the record. That's when Leland Dudek plucked from a mid-level job only 6 weeks earlier to run Social Security because of his willingness to cooperate with Mr. Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or douche, got an angry call from the White House, according to several people familiar with the exchange. The number is 40%, insisted Katie Miller, a top administration aide who was working closely with Mr. Musk, according to one of the people familiar with the April 1 call. President Trump believed Mr. Musk, she said, quote, "Do not contradict the president." So, if you're wondering why it is that Stephen Miller every day talks and acts like he didn't sleep at all last night and instead had spent the evening frog-tied in his own basement while somebody beat him repeatedly with oddly shaped pieces of rubber, well, I'm just saying. But the winner, the worst, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. L-I-E in her first name, L-I-E in her last name. and Sigmund Freud in her soul. As Trump tried to show off his trade deal with the British at the G7, and he said it was a deal with the EU because he doesn't know that's not the same thing. EU, UK, I see you, you see me talk now, President, sleepy time. Trump opened the folder with the deal with the British and not the EU, and the loose pages fell to the ground. Immediately, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer bent down to pick them up. Why did he do that? Why is the Premier of the UK reduced to picking up the stuff Trump just dropped? You and I might assume it's because Starmer realizes that Trump can't bend down. But no, sir. It was because he was afraid that, Trump's security phalanx would then open fire or start tackling people. The day after this happened, Starmer said, quote, look, there weren't many choices with the documents in picking it up because, as you probably know, there were quite strict rules about who can get close to the president. Seriously, I think if any of you, meaning the media, had stepped forward other than me, I was just deeply conscious that in a situation like that, it would not have been good for anybody else to have stepped forward, not that any of you rushed to. There's a very tightly guarded security zone around the president, as you would expect. So that's the end of the quote. Translate what he's saying here. If anybody else but him had reached down to try to pick the papers up that Trump dropped and may or may not have realized he dropped, the entirety of the American security force would have descended upon them. And knowing the quality of the people that Trump hires, they probably would have shot first. So Keir Starmer prevented a massacre in Canada. Like with Huey Long. Look it up. Huey Long. Now to the Levitt part of this. Kind of fittingly, Caroline Levitt then tweeted out a photo of Trump at a news conference at the G7. It was chosen presumably because alone of the dozens of people in the crowded photograph, Trump is the only one clearly visible. You can see him from the head to the torso, from the bottom of his 8-foot-long tie to the bottom of his 73rd chin. The problem is, in this photo that Caroline Levitt put out, Trump is perfectly placed in front of a Canadian flag with only the left-hand red bar of that flag visible, and it's right above Trump's head. So there's Trump, and right above him is this furled red thing in a conical shape. So as you look closer and closer, it is perfectly shaped, it is perfectly proportioned, it is perfectly positioned, and it looks exactly like Trump is wearing a red dunce cap. Caroline, if this is a call for help, blink twice. Oh, no, make it more obvious than that. If this is a call for help, tell the truth twice. Levitt, today's other worst poison in the world! To the number one story on the countdown, and a story that begins a little bit in the past. 1934. I was not there for that part of it, but in 1934, my mother, who was 5 years old, was sent over to her uncle's house or apartment for the day. My grandparents needed the day off from her for some reason, and I'm not sure what it was. But her Uncle Willie, my great Uncle Willie, took her to Yankee Stadium, along with a kid that he knew who he used to push to Yankee Stadium because the young man was in a wheelchair. And often before the games in 1934, the last season that the legendary Babe Ruth played for the New York Yankees, Babe Ruth would see this kid in a wheelchair and, consistent with the times, would come over and rub his back for good luck, which seems to us to be very crass. And also, if you're just looking at it from a superstition point of view, how in the world would that be good luck? In any event. So one day, for the first time, when she was 5 years old and just turned 5 years old, her birthday was in June, she goes with her Uncle Willie and the boy in the wheelchair to Yankee Stadium. They don't have the money to go to the games. It's the middle of the Depression, but they live in the Bronx. They're a few blocks away from the stadium, and they go to say hi to the players on the way in. And sure enough, Babe Ruth says hello to them and asks my mother at the age of 5 what her name is. Now, her name was Marie, but because her mother's name was also Marie, the family often referred to her as Babe. I heard my grandmother refer to my mother as Babe when my mother was 45 years old. It was rather extraordinary. In any event, she says, "My name is Babe," and Babe Ruth was so delighted by this that he went back inside and got her a brand new baseball, which he gave to my mother. The first day she went to Yankee Stadium, she met Babe Ruth, she talked to Babe Ruth, and Babe Ruth gave her a baseball. Needless to say, in the ensuing 66 years that my mother was a Yankee fan, nothing of interest ever happened to her at Yankee Stadium. She would eventually see the Yankees win a couple of World Series, and eventually she saw her own son reporting from the field after the World Series games on the World Series broadcast, but nothing like getting a baseball from Babe Ruth on your first day as a fan and meeting Babe Ruth occurred to her. There was a brawl once between Red Sox and Yankees fans, I recall, when I was 10 or 11 years old. Beer was thrown, and she may have gotten a few drops of beer on the shoulder of her dress. I seem to recall that happening. That was it. Nothing else of interest, certainly nothing difficult or untoward happened to my mother at Yankee Stadium until the middle of June in the year 2000. The Yankees, on that Saturday afternoon, had a second baseman named Chuck Knobloch, who had been a great star for them and an extraordinary addition to their team and set off the process by which they won 3 consecutive World Series and 4 in a span of 5 years, and almost 5 in a span of 6 years. In any event, Knobloch unfortunately had an issue throwing the ball to first base. Many second basemen, many baseball players have developed this. It's somewhat consistent with the idea of the yips in golf, where you can't sink the putt even though it's 2 feet away. For baseball players, it turns out to generally be an expression of emotional distress. Your mind is sabotaging the most fundamental thing in the game. It's stopping you from throwing the ball. And the easier the play is, the more familiar you are with it, the more difficult it suddenly becomes. It happened to Chuck Knobloch. It happened to another second baseman named Steve Sachs. And they've all turned out, and there was a pitcher, a minor league pitcher who became a writer named Pat Jordan, and they all turned out, and another one named Rick Ankiel, a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, all of whom suddenly lost the ability to throw the ball in the easiest way possible, in the way in which they had the most control. Couldn't throw the ball over the baseman's head, over the catcher's head, into the stands. Well, that's where we joined Chuck Knobloch. As it later turned out, Chuck Knobloch's father, who had seen every one of his games from Little League, who had gone to all his high school games, who had traveled the country when Chuck Knobloch played in the minor leagues, who'd gone to all the road games of the Minnesota Twins and the Yankees. Chuck Knobloch's father had Alzheimer's disease and was in the final stages of it, and sometime early in the 2000 season lost the ability to recognize the Yankee second baseman Chuck Knobloch. Well, that accelerated a problem that would later, or shortly thereafter, make Chuck Knobloch an ex-second baseman. And on this day in June of 2000, I was completing the second year of a 2-year, not particularly happy stint as the host of Fox Baseball Game of the Week on the Fox television network. I was based in Los Angeles, and every Saturday I spent the whole day from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night in a studio in Los Angeles that was kept down about 36 degrees, not my choice. I had to wear a winter coat sometimes when we weren't on the air. We would do a pregame show, which, because of the timing difference, started at 10 a.m., and they like to rehearse their pregame shows. Madness. All the good lines had been used and made stupid and not funny by the time we got on the air. They would rehearse this show 2 times, 3 times. It was an awful experience, and my co-host was one of the worst persons in the world, a man named Steve Lyons, who made me look like somebody who never complained once in his life. That's the only good aspect of working with Steve Lyons. He complained an average of 3 times a minute. All right, so Lyons and I are there doing the game of the week, and that day the broadcast was from Los Angeles, and it was a 4 p.m. Eastern start, 1 p.m. Pacific time. So the game and the show started a little bit late, and we get them started, the Dodgers and whoever it was at Dodger Stadium with Joe Buck and Tim McCarver as the announcers, and me in the studio, and Lyons goes away, and he won't be back till the post-game show, so everybody's happier. Somewhere in the middle of the game, I'm watching the bank of televisions that's showing all the other games in progress, and the Chicago White Sox are playing at Yankee Stadium in New York. This is the remodeled Yankee Stadium that operated between the years 1976 and 2008. I essentially grew up in Yankee Stadium, the original Yankee Stadium, and then this modified, reconstructed one that reopened in 1976. And I knew not only every nook and cranny of the ballpark, but I knew every camera angle. And we had since 1972, my family, Yankee season tickets, which I had been paying for since about 1992, even though I did not live in New York. They were for my mother, who went 40, 50 times a year. So by this point, my mother has been to since that first game when she was greeted by Babe Ruth at the front door of Yankee Stadium. Here, welcome to your future. Here's a baseball from me, Babe Ruth. She has been to at least 1,000 games. She went to more games in her life than I have. Actually, literally true. And she is seated in the seats, in our seats, which have been the same one, box 47E, since the stadium reopened in 1976, and this is the year 2000. So she is, in essence, celebrating her 25th anniversary in those seats. The Chicago White Sox are playing the New York Yankees. They would rout the Yankees that day, and the Yankees were in the middle of a funk in the middle of the season, due not in small part to Chuck Knobloch's sudden inability to throw the ball successfully from second base to first base. He would throw it past the first baseman, over the first baseman. He would drop the ball as he threw it. It would fly out of his hand, and of course later it proved this was a psychological protest from deep within his mind against playing baseball anymore. It was too painful because his father was so sick and his father was so intimately connected to the game. So now Greg Norton of the Chicago White Sox hits a fairly tough play towards Chuck Knobloch, grounds the ball to the right of the mound. Chuck Knobloch has to charge in, pick the ball up barehanded, and while slightly off balance, throw it backwards towards the Yankee first baseman Tino Martinez. Not an impossible play, and not an impossible play for a good second baseman as Chuck Knobloch had been, but under the circumstances, a disaster in the making, which we then saw unfold. Chuck Knobloch throws the ball. It leaves his hand not straight, but an angle to the right of about, 50, 60 degrees. The ball shoots out of his hand and goes nowhere near first base. It goes into the stands behind first base, and in fact, it goes to box 47E, where my mother is seated with my high school friend and his 2 kids, and my mother is sitting where the incoming throw has just been launched. I am seeing this unfold on a monitor, one of like 9 with different games going on, but I know Yankee Stadium, and as I said, the camera angles intimately. So I know immediately where the ball, based on where it left Knobloch's hand, where it has likely gone. And I say, that may have hit my mother. They then cut to a shot of a woman being attended to, and I say, that hit my mother. And everybody in the room laughs because they assume I'm joking, because what are the odds that while I am in the studio hosting the game of the week and doing the highlights of the games in progress, when they say, now let's go back to the studio for a Fox game break, I'm the guy doing the game breaks. That was my job for 2 years. And sure enough, I say that's my mother, and everybody laughs, and then they cut to a tight shot of a woman holding her head with a little blood, and her glasses have been broken, and she looks kind of dazed and confused, and they are leading her away, and I went, that's Mom. And now I call her on my cell phone, and you see her while she is on camera on the local broadcast of the Yankee White Sox game. You see her answering the phone. That's when they stopped laughing in the studio. That's when they realized it was really my mother. So I talked to her, and she said, I'm okay, broke my glasses. They think maybe I should go home, and Georgia and Georgia's kids, they want to go home after that. And I said, did you get the ball? Showing where my level of concern was. No, I'm sorry. I was like, oh, for Christ's sake, Mom. So she's fine, and otherwise I wouldn't have asked that question, probably. Anyway, now we're predicting this sort of situation. What do we do with it? And is it going to be a controversy? And I said, we have to put the highlight on. And I have to mention that it's my mother. It's not like we're not going to show. If it was some other woman, we'd show it, wouldn't we? It would be the biggest story in baseball today. We have to do it. And I just happen to know who it is. So we're thrown to by Joe Buck and Tim McCarver. Time for a Fox game break. Here's Keith Olbermann in the studio. White Sox and Yankees, Joe, and Chuck Knobloch's throwing problem is now getting personal. He picks up the Greg Norton bounder from the White Sox Yankees in the Bronx and throws it into the stands where, right on the edit, it hits my mother. Mom's okay. I called her. She's a gamer. She'll be back tomorrow. She just got her lenses broken. Joe, Tim, back to you. Silence from Dodger Stadium in the broadcast. You just hear like birds in the background from Dodger Stadium. For the first time in their lives, Joe Buck and Tim McCarver have between them nothing to say. I don't know what to say, says Joe Buck. Is Keith kidding? Is that one of Keith's jokes? Says Tim, who is an old friend of mine. Keith, are you still there? I'm still here, Timmy. Are you kidding? Why would I kid about something like that? Was that really your mother? What are the odds against that? And I said, well, she's been going to games since 1934. That first game she ever went to, Babe Ruth gave her a baseball. Nothing bad has happened in the ensuing years. So I'd say the odds were probably about 6-5 in favor. And he goes, I guess you're right. I can't believe that was Keith's mother that got hit by the throw by Chuck Knobloch. Well, give us an update later on how she is. Will do, Tim. So now the story is out. It's my mother who got hit by the ball. June 17th, 18th, one of the 2 days, the Saturday of that weekend, 2000. Only the kind of thing that could happen to my mother, but again, truly, the odds were not that impossible. The ball's thrown behind first base. Here's a woman who's gone to an average of 40, 50 games a year in that stadium for 25 years. The odds are pretty good it's going to hit her. And if you're getting meta, and like what are the universal odds, what are the metaphysical odds that she gets hit, as I said, nothing of interest has happened to her since 1934. She's due. In any event, just to add to this, two of my best friends in the world worked for the Yankees. One was the manager, Joe Torre. The other was the head of publicity, Rick Cerrone. Not the catcher, Rick Cerrone, but the head of publicity, Rick Cerrone. So I call Rick Cerrone in the office at Yankee Stadium in the press box because I figure he's already figured this out, and I want to give him a heads up that I had no choice but to mention that it was my mother since it was my broadcast. I call him up. I said, did you see the Knobloch throw? No, I heard about it. I've been here in the back. I didn't see who it hit. I said, do you have any idea who it was? He said, no, why would I have any idea who it was? I said, why would I be calling you? I don't know, Keith. Why would you be calling me? I said, how many times have you sat behind first base with me and somebody else? And he goes, wait a minute, what are you saying? I said, how many times did you and I go as teenage friends in the 70s and sat behind first base? And he goes, oh, God, no. I said, yep. He said, that hit your mother? I said, yep. And he said, first off, he said, did she get the ball? And I went, no, she didn't. Oh, for crying out loud. Well, what, you didn't say anything about it, did you? I went, of course I said something. They showed her on your broadcast. And he goes, oh, God, no. I said, what other choice did I have? He goes, no, you're right. You're right. All right, I better get out there. We're going to start getting phone calls about this if we haven't already. Thanks for the heads up. So now the next day, the newspapers of New York, front and back page of the New York Post, the New York Daily News, and the Long Island paper Newsday, front and back page, some reference to my mother. Photographs in the Daily News of her being led away. Chuck Knobloch hits sportscaster's mother. And the day after that, they're still telling the story. And there are wire stories, and it is everywhere. And, of course, we mentioned it maybe once or twice an hour on Fox Sports and on cable and on broadcast. So now Mom is a celebrity. And I must confess to you, Mom really liked being a celebrity. Mom was appreciative of my success in my career, but Mom had wanted to be a ballerina. Apparently, she told me that. I don't really buy it, but that was her story. And she was a little jealous, resentful, just in a manageable way most of the time. But I don't want to bore you with my developmental problems emotionally. Mom was a little jealous of not being in the spotlight, and she gloried in this. Among other things, Mom wound up being interviewed on the pregame show for the next Saturday's game of the week. And for various reasons, we could not do a live remote interview with her. So we sat down and I recorded the questions in Los Angeles and on the phone asked her the questions while she was in our ancestral home in the suburbs of New York City. And Mom didn't really have any good answers, so I said, why don't you just repeat the answers that I give you? I'll give you good snarky answers, real quick ones, and we can do this and you can make fun of me. Okay. She had a little trouble delivering the lines, and we actually did several takes. So if anybody wants to call the FCC and say, that interview was not what it seemed in 2000, go right ahead. I don't know what you're going to do to us about it, but go right ahead. There were some elements of fakery to this, like I wrote her answers for her. But there was one answer to one of my 6 or 7 questions that she gave completely authentically, and we did not need a second take. And this may tell you the nature of the complicated relationship between me and my mother and baseball and Chuck Knobloch. I said, are you surprised that everybody's so interested in this? And I wrote for her as an answer, no, but I'm surprised they keep mentioning you. She had no trouble giving that line whatsoever. She really bought into that answer. You could see from the tape when I eventually saw the tape that she was smiling during that one. So in any event, Mom becomes a celebrity for several months. This is June of 2000. Come October, when the Yankees and Mets played in the World Series and she was in the stands, number one, my employers had given her a Fox Sports cap to wear, and they repeatedly showed her during the games of the World Series at Yankee Stadium. So Mom became a celebrity and became very well known for getting hit in the head with Chuck Knobloch's throw. Joe Torre, who I mentioned, was an old friend of mine, the first person I ever interviewed in television, and a colleague in local sports in television in L.A. when I worked there in the 80s and 90s. Joe Torre called me up right afterwards and asked how she was, and I said, she's fine. How's your second baseman? He acts like he got hit in the head with a throw, too. He's very worried you think he did it deliberately. And I said, Joe, you have to tell him that I'm confident he did not do it deliberately. If he was aiming at my mother, he would have missed. Joe Torre laughs, and later he tells me he told Knobloch that, and it was Knobloch's first laugh of the year. All right, so moving ahead on this story, it continued for many years. For at least 10 years, once or twice a month, somebody in baseball would say, was it your mother who got hit by Chuck Knobloch's throw? Memorably, in the year 2005, the year that the Hall of Famer Randy Johnson, the big left-hander of the mostly the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Seattle Mariners and the Montreal Expos, he pitched one season for the Yankees, and the Yankees got blown out in the playoffs that year. And before the last game of the season, and this is one of my favorite moments in the history of baseball, before that last game, I walk out into the Yankee dugout, and there is Al Leiter, who was a friend of mine then and now. He is telling the story of my mother and Chuck Knobloch to 2 other Yankee pitchers, Scott Proctor and Randy Johnson. And I walk in, and he goes, and then Olbermann's mother gets hit in the head, and he says he's doing the highlights on TV on the game of the week, and he said, and I walk out, and he goes, did you hear that I was telling the story about you? And I said, well, only the last couple of steps. This is a coincidence. Finish the story yourself. So now I got the 3 of them, and they're all in hysterics. Yankees lose that last game of the playoffs. I don't know. It seemed like it was 150-0. And I go into the clubhouse after the game to say goodbye for the offseason to the few players that I knew on the team, including Al Leiter and to Randy Johnson. And Randy Johnson, in his own deep-voiced way, goes, thanks, good to see you. Have a good winter. And he leaves with his little carrying case with his little wheels on it, and it looks like a toy. He's 6'10", and he has a roller case designed for maybe his daughter. It looks like a toy. And he leaves, and about 5 minutes later, I see the door to the Yankee clubhouse open up, and in walk Randy Johnson. And he comes over to me, and he said, I forgot to say something. I was already out to my car, and I thought I better come back in and say goodbye to Keith and tell him. I mean, this was a really bad week, this last week, as we've been losing and the season ended. And I just wanted to say that telling that story about your mother really was the highlight of the whole thing and made me smile for the only time this month. So thank you. Have a great winter. So that's my mother and Randy Johnson 5 years after she got hit in the head with a throw by Chuck Knobloch, the second baseman of the Yankees. One of the more remarkable moments in the history of Major League Baseball, at least as it pertains to the Olbermann family, and a kind of bookend. Mom stopped going to the games about 2005. She physically could not do it, but she had a good run as a Yankee fan of about 70 seasons that was essentially bookended by getting hit in the head with a throw that made her famous within baseball circles, and began with her being handed a baseball at her first game ever by Babe Ruth, who was charmed by the fact that my mother's nickname was Babe. Punchline to this, to me, is one of the most avid collectors of sports memorabilia and particularly game-used baseballs. I didn't get either of those baseballs from my mom. My God, 25 years ago. And the best part remains, Chuck Knobloch for years thought he had done it deliberately. As if he would have hit her if he had done it deliberately. I've done all the damage I can do here. And yes, I'm not exaggerating in any of that. Mom loved that. Mom was disappointed when that faded out. Mom thought there would be a ceremony on the first anniversary. Thanks for listening. Most of the countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, who are our musical directors of Countdown, and the music was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc., is the sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today, fittingly with the sports theme, was my friend Kenny Mayne. Everything else was, as always, my fault. So that's Countdown for today, day 151 of America Held Hostage. Just 1,313 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck, lame-brained term, unless Putin or Musk remove him sooner. Or he decides to ride the bomb into Iran. Or the actuarial tables remove him. Or we do. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. Until that next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, and good luck.